Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Welby Ings. Dr. Ings is a professor in design at Auckland University of Technology. He is the elected fellow of the British Royal Society of Arts and a consultant to many organisations on issues of creativity and learning. He is also an award-winning academic, designer and filmmaker. Dr. Ings has taught at all levels of the New Zealand educational system and remains an outspoken critic of the system's obsession with assessing performance. In 2001, Dr. Ings was awarded the Prime Minister's inaugural Supreme Award for Tertiary Teaching Excellence. This year, Dr. Ings published Disobedient Teaching, I have a copy here, which is an incredibly successful book to the extent that it's sold out completely in New Zealand, and this copy had to come in from overseas, which looks at disobedience as a type of professional behaviour and considers how positive disobedience can influence the way we influence change. As a boy, Dr. Ings fought hard against the conventional schooling system and until the age of 15 could neither read nor write. He was eventually expelled and then later suspended from Teachers College. But now, as an award-winning academic, designer and filmmaker, he challenges the way we look at creativity and leadership. He studies how we attract, hold and grow highly innovative people in organisations and how to make certain that certain individuals can navigate damaged systems to become profound influential leaders. In short, being valued because they can grow genuine leadership in others. Dr. Ings.
The notes are only pictures, it's all right, it's not a... Kia ora mai tātou, nā mihi nui nā kukia koutou katoa. Ina mana, ina reo, ina mata, ina wako te motu. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. You know, whenever I go to a conference, sometimes you go to conferences and you walk out and you go, well, that was actually a bloody waste of time because all I heard was a whole lot of euphoric stories. And I have to deal with life on the concrete. And so I gave some thought to how I might approach this. And I wanted to start with this. That guy there's my dad. And he was a shearing contractor. And he shore in the sheds of Arahina and Puahui and Wotu and Pukeatua, places you've probably never heard of. Anyway, don't worry, it's middle New Zealand, top of the King Country. And those three scrubby kids sitting on the car, that's my twin sister and me and my next sister down. And my dad died about 10 years ago, and I loved him very much. And he taught me something very profound, because an incident happened when he, at his funeral. He was a very quiet man. He wasn't a man who would call himself a leader. And although he became a district commissioner in Scouts, although he was the ringer in the shearing gang, although when people went bankrupt in our little district and lost their farms, they would come to him. He didn't normally give advice, he listened. But he taught me something very profound, that I don't think leadership is actually about getting people to obey you. Leadership is the power of influence. Leadership is the ability to move other people in another direction. And he had from there I'd like to pick up two qualities that he had. He had two things. He had boot me up the backside for saying this, but it's the easiest way I can explain it. First one is that he didn't think obediently. Even though he was a shearing contractor, and even though people would go, you know, if any of you have grown up in small rural districts, shearing and fencing contractors, share milkers kind of near the bottom of the pile. Wealthy landowners, third generation family near the top. Okay, so, but in fact, he never asked permission to do things. He would suss something, and if he thought it was right, then he'd just go ahead with it. And the second one is he never set himself up as a hero. And yet when I look back at his life, a man who was hugely influential, and he had a lot to do with shaping the way that I approach the world. So I want to have a look at the first of these ideas. The term disobedient thinking was something that came out of a conversation I was having with somebody once when they were asking what I thought creativity is. See, I don't think creativity has anything to do with the arts at all. That's being artistic. You know, so I know people who are composers and artists who are actually tired old hacks. They're just recycling the same thing again, again, and again, and again. But I know farmers who are hugely creative. I know people who can go into situations, and when they get caught in a cul-de-sac, they don't stop. They disobey. They go, all of my experience gets me to here, and this isn't far enough, so I don't say I can't do it. I think disobediently. In other words, I trade beyond experience. I operate beyond the experience that I've had to now, the experience of the people sitting around me, the experience of that situation. That's what I think disobedient thinking is. So it's not being a wanker. It's not somebody who stands up and postures themselves around going, oh, watch me be controversial. It's probably no help to anybody. But if it's positive disobedience, if it's a way of disobeying your own editor, your own conventions, your own socially prescribed person to get to something better, then I think it's a very profound thing. So let me give you an example. How many of you, just put up a hand if you've lived in a second-story or third-story apartment. Okay, so you may know this scenario, but you don't have to expose yourself by going, yeah, that's me. Okay, so, sometimes you have a pitiful little deck out the front, and this guy's obviously been drying his pants out the front, and they fell down. Okay, this is what I think disobedient thinking is. Okay. It's the ability to look at a situation and find a solution that convention would not have allowed you to do it, but it finds a solution. It's not decorative, it's not frou-frou, it's finding a solution. So similarly, this may not be held up as a great example of moral behavior, but it's this guy who passes his exams this way. Okay, so everyone's going to be on the lookout for that one now from here on in. Okay. Or if you're like me and don't drive the flashiest vehicle under the sun and don't have a huge income to do it, it may be when somebody's stuck a screwdriver through the lock in your car that you find another locking mechanism. What it actually is, though, is a way of reimagining the world productively, a way of re-looking at a situation, re-questioning something, so you come up with something that enhances the quality of life for people. So, here's an interesting thing, though. When we talk about creativity, lots of people talk about and go aspirationally. They go, oh, this is something we all want. This is something we all want. And then they go, give me 10 quick, easy fixes for getting it. It doesn't actually work like that because it's a plant that grows in a kind of soil. And if you don't have that soil, or if you're not a person who can create that kind of soil, all you can have is the imitations of creativity. So, this is Ralph Kaplan, and I thought this was a really interesting thing. When he talks about it, he says, one of the hallmarks of you as a creative person is your ability to tolerate ambiguity and dissonance and inconsistency and stuff out of place. But one of the rules often of a well-run corporation is that surprises to be minimalized. So you can control stuff. Yet, if that rule was to be applied to the creative process, nothing worth reading would get written, nothing worth seeing would get planned or painted, nothing worth living with or using would ever get designed. You would never move forward. You would stay stagnantly, repeating, remodeling, reshaping the same thing. And so we have a conflict. When we work in what are considered conservative organizations, but we actually imagine and are able to question beyond that, we often face professional loneliness and we face alienation. And then we work out, how the hell do I survive this? But moreover, if I'm a leader, if I'm genuinely a leader, how do I look out for those other thinkers to make sure that they don't leave, that they don't bugger off, because that's generally what they do. So, Alan Fletcher, he described creativity as a really interesting thing. He said, it's a compulsive human urge. So he says, it's actually natural. It's a natural thing to do, and it's compulsive. When we get stuck, we go, how do I sort this? It's a compulsive human urge which demands more than ritual actions or routine responses, and it is only valid when you trade beyond experience. That means when you trade beyond the formulas that have got you to where you are. The fact that you get stuck in a situation or a team of people get stuck is because their previous experience doesn't give them a template for it. You have to start navigating without a roadmap. Those people, and there's some of you in here, are hugely valuable, but they often pose a threat in organizations because if you give them free rein, they start exposing how tired and ineffective the thinking is. They don't do it deliberately, it's just because they naturally will trade beyond experience. So, What stops you? Well, I'm going to ask you to do something. Don't worry, you're not going to have to stand up and mime. You're not going to have to show anybody what you do, but in front of you, you've probably got a bit of paper. Okay? And I'm going to ask you to come up with a solution to something. I want you to, how do we put this? I'd like you to, design a way of turning a staircase into a wardrobe. No, hang on. Don't worry, you probably go, oh, fuck. Okay. Well, this is what's happened. This morning when you got up, something climbed out of bed with you. And you know the shower that's hanging over the bath in the hotel? They climbed in there with you. And they had lunch with you, and they're sitting beside you right now. And their job is to constrain your thinking. Their job is to make sure that you don't expose yourself socially as somebody who's going to think in a difficult way. And so what will happen is when you get a question like that, you could know this person as this. They're your social editor. They've grown up with you. They tell you not to say things when you've had an idea in a group. They tell you to stop thinking that because it's not going to be productive. They will come, your social editor, when I told you to turn the staircase into a wardrobe, these are probably the 5 things they've said to you. The first one, you may have heard them. The first one they said is, you can't, it's too hard. That may translate as bugger off, but it means you can't, it's too hard. Okay. Or they've said this to you. They've said, the idea is ridiculous, stupid, silly in the first place, why would you want to do it? These are all shutting down tactics. Or they will have said this to you. It's a waste of time. My limited resources and time, which means the 20 seconds I had here sitting at the table, are worth too much to try this. Or this is the most important one. I'll look like an idiot if I say this. If we're in a discussion and I get this idea, I might look like an idiot. And so when you look at philosophers like John Dewey, he actually argues that the single motivating factor in all human beings, the thing they take the most care of, is the need to be valued. So if they're going to say something that might make them look like an idiot, they're not going to speak. So when you're sitting in a room and you've got 8 people working with you and you need the maximum thinking, and you create an environment where those people are not valued for thinking, you're going to get shut down. And yet some of you have the opposite ability. You have the ability to grow that stuff up from the table. So if you go, what does your wardrobe look like? Well, it's stupid and it's a waste of time, and a staircase can't look like a wardrobe. Of course it can. Of course it can. The human brain, this extraordinary thing you have sitting on the top of your shoulders, is capable of incredible sophistication, incredible connections between things that can make impossible marriages. And those people who can do that, we see as the innovators, as the problem solvers, but they have to be empowered to do it. But what happens when we try to deal with creative thinking is we often get 2 substitutes. And the first one, I'll show you what they look like. Now, your social editor is going to tell you not to do this, so tell them to bugger off. I want you to, on your piece of paper, imagine you've got the front slide on a PowerPoint, and the slide is to do with creativity. Draw down a little graphic to show creativity. Tell your social editor to piss off. Just draw down a little graphic. Now, the first thing that happens when we work with creativity is we use the most common substitute is we decorate a cliche, which in other words means your graphic might have looked like this. It had a light bulb, right? Or it might have looked like that. 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 That means a known solution that already exists, and I will frou-frou it up. I'll decorate it. So this is the same thing of and we call it creativity, but it's not. It's actually just ornamenting what already exists. So it's this thing that in education, when you get a teacher who goes, oh, we're going to do this really, really creative thing. We're going to make a mural, and it's all going to be made out of tiles, and it's going to be fish, and the kids are going to paint them, and it's going to be really, really creative. And you go, oh, bugger it off. What you had there was a fish template, and they got to choose the colour on it. Okay, it might look great on the wall, but it's not creative thinking. It's putting colour on something. So we use this idea of the artistic as a replacement, but it's not. It's not. No, the other one is this kind of one, which was, some of you may have had, of those of you who took LSD in the 70s, which was the head with the top off it and lots of things coming out. So that's just kind of the second standard cliche, which looks like this, or it might look like this, or it might look like this, or it might look like this. Now, you're actually capable of immensely, a lot more than that. That's just, you're just being safe. Just being safe because you need to be valued. You don't want to put there the elephant tap dancing on a cutthroat razor, because someone's going to go, you're a bit of a knob. So you edit that stuff. Your social editor trains you away from thinking. We actually train ourselves away from thought. We train ourselves away from disobedience in a need to fit in. But what happens in organizations that are predicated on fitting in is they don't move. They recycle. So many bits of print out here. So, okay, the second one, so that's the ornamentation. The second one is this. And this is one that is probably the more common. Oh, I'll get the paper, I'll just stick it over here. Okay, this is more common. This is called adaptive thinking. And this is the one we actually train people as a way of solving problems. And it's very destructive. But it's the one that you've probably been trained from the time you were a kid. And this is the one where we go, okay, we've got to come up with a solution, so let's go out there and see what's there at the moment and have a look at that and collect it together and analyze and then come up with a solution. All right, so this is your technology teacher at school who said to you, I want you to design a bed. Now go home and cut out pictures of beds and put them in your book and then look at them and then design a bed. No. No, all you're doing is adapting what exists. This is the one, how many of you in the last 10 years at some point redesigned a kitchen in your house? Okay, so this is how deeply embedded this is. There are whole magazines we produce for people like you. We go, your kitchen, your career, this is you, individual you. And what we do is we feed you. So you think the solution to understanding your kitchen is to go through magazines and look at lots of modernist kitchens, cut them up, and then do a little synthesis and adaptation around it. And what you end up with is something like this. Lovely, but it's not your kitchen. It's a synthesis of somebody else's thinking, and you're fitting in with it. But when we're working with highly creative thinkers, we ask a fundamentally different approach. We say to them, suck the question into yourself, not the solutions. In other words, go and live in your kitchen for a year. Go and live in there, and it will tell you what it needs. Work out how you actually exist with that question. So you don't suck in solutions, you pull the question in. And that's the fun. That's why when we're working with developing creative thinking, it is question-based. It's question-based to get you to a solution, but it understands that what we call our tacit knowledge, that's the knowledge we don't know we know. You've got a huge backpack of it on you. It gets that working on the thing, rather than somebody else's solutions. And oftentimes, because you have the lived experience of the thing, or the people with whom you're working have a lived experience of that thing, they will come up with very, very rich stuff if you're prepared to work that way with them. So, what happens is, if we develop this adaptive thinking, this is the kind of thing you get. You get solutions to something that are simply adaptions of what already exists. So you don't cut yourself ahead of anybody else. You're actually very predictive, which is why a standard technique we use, again, when we're trying to grow very highly creative thinkers, is we go, put down the 3 most obvious answers to this. So you say to the room, okay, let's get the 3 most obvious answers up to whatever. So they all put them up, and then you go, you cannot use them. You cannot use them. Now, it hurts like hell, because all the generous people who just chop their legs off by putting up the answers have all been exposed. Everyone's seen them. You actually are forcing the brain into a gym. Because we don't actually exercise creativity very much at all. We don't. We exercise these other 2 versions of it. So when you're sitting in a situation yourself and you go, okay, so what are the 3 answers that my competitors will have? Or 2 answers if you have to. And get them up there and then take them off the plate so you're working from an advantage point before you start. Now, it's a really simple device, but that's why you see it in advertising agencies. That's why you see it in startup software businesses. That's why you see that behavior happening, because it's pushing the potential of people beyond the comfortable. So, when we identify what is the known or what is the standard, and then we consciously work away from it, we're more likely to using our backpack of knowledge that we don't know is there, and what we do know, we're more likely to come up with solutions. But here's the situation. We know from organisations, I've done quite a bit of study of organisations that leapt forward, either economically or socially. And one of the things that's very common in an organisation is, especially if it tends to be built on a wounded hierarchy, is that people higher up do not actually want to employ people who will threaten their position. They don't want to employ thinkers. They want to employ thinkers who will enhance their position. And so when you have a seriously productive, disruptive thinker, they can actually pose a threat. So what happens is you will often find organizations are very good at pulling people in. They do great advertising campaigns. You go, oh, this is where I can go to, and I can exercise my ability, and I can be a fully rounded person, and I'll be extended, I'll be all that. And you get into it, and then in the middle tier, those people start getting frustrated because they hit a glass ceiling. They get consulted instead of co-created with. They get asked for their opinion, and then somebody decides whether it's any good or not. And they get frustrated, and they leave. And those are the kind of people who you find out, 2 years later have got a startup business that's competing with yours because you weren't able to keep them. And then you look at occasionally, even in a very conservative organization, you'll get a little hub of people where you've got a leader, and I would argue this leader is closer to a coach than a leader. They're not driven by the big ego out the front. They're driven by trying to maximize the potential of the people they've got in that team. And they understand that those individuals are more talented than they are. What they do is they know how the system works. So they go, I've got your shoulder. I've got your back. You're going to need to be responsible for what you do, but it's my job to look out for you. And then they grow those groups very, very fast. So if you get into an organization that you find is stagnating, it's often a really useful thing to look at your top tier of people and find out if there are people in there who are operating more as coaches, because they're probably the people you're needing to move those innovative thinkers towards, because they're more likely to create an environment for growth. So this is what we kind of get. We're all about creativity, get in the room and start creating. Yeah. But you know that every time you come up with your solution, someone's going to go, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, and we're back away from it, segued into something that's feeling a little more comfortable. And this is how are we going for time? Yeah, 5? Keep going. Okay. All right, so this is the problem we kind of, sorry, second-hand coat, it doesn't matter. This is the situation that oftentimes organizations, especially those that are operating as a damaged hierarchy, have a particular kind of leader that's a very simplified leader. It's the heroic leader. It's the one whose poster you had on your bedroom wall. It's the one that simplified down the historical leader into an individual, when in fact that person was comprised, if they were effective, were comprised of a team of people. They had advisors, they had people they could reflect to. They weren't, the idea of the singular, heroic individual is largely a myth, but it is the one that we hold up in front of people. And so generally, you'll get this person, and we model ourselves on it. We go, well, if I'm going to get ahead, I'd better be heroic. So we go, these are the skills we say are important: being singular, visionary, a problem solver, fearless, all-knowing, assigning tasks, and having that little dynamic which goes, I either command, I control, or I coerce. I hold reward and punishment. But it all comes back to the individual, and everything is filtered through the individual. Even though if you cut out that group of people and you go, let's say there's 28 people here, infinitely brighter than this one here. That's just logic. It's just logic. But in a heroic model, it will all have to channel through one person, because what has to be maintained is their egotistical state as a leader. Everything has to serve their position as the leader, because they nominate and take control of all the idea of leadership in the group. They may use the language, so you get cool words coming out, so they'll trot out the key words, but you watch their behavior and it isn't there, which is different. When you get another group, it's significantly different. When you find a small hub, it might only be 3 people who are operating in a far flatter system that is more mentor-based, co-coaching, co-supporting, and a high analysis of initiatives and a high sense of responsibility around them. So, this is what happens. This is our wounded hierarchy. Sometimes it's the mega picture, sometimes it's a micro picture inside your organization. But basically, somebody who's not effective is making certain that their position is maintained, and they're using what is effective from those people below them, but they're grafting it onto themselves. So this is the kind of leader who says, my team, but never names them individually. It's the kind of leader who talks about themselves as the arbiter, themselves as the person who makes the right decisions and who's all-knowing and assigns. Now, here's a really interesting thing. When Tamara Erickson started doing her research about the millennials, and I was interested when we were talking this morning about 40% in the Australian forces of millennials. Here's some frightening stuff. Well, frightening, no. It's either frightening or it's really amazing. What we know is that the people who come into your organisation, who are between from about 18 to about 30, have no conscious memory of learning to use a computer. It was always there. Now, that is much deeper than it looks. Those people also grew up being able to get information whenever they wanted to. They didn't have to go through a publisher or a boss or a thing. They could get to information. Whether that is open access software or whether that's news of what's just happened in Egypt, they could go to it. So they're used to getting information quickly. They're used to working not just with technology, but with the blueprints of technology. Not consciously, it's tacit. So they're less frightened by technology because they have a lived experience from the youngest age of being able to navigate the kind of blueprint. So they have high expectations of flexibility. They have high expectations of access to information. They have very, very broad exposure to ideas, so they didn't grow up in a world where there was one right way. They understand multiple truths. And they understand, if you like, post-truth too. They understand that maybe the idea of the singular right thing is not always the answer. Maybe there are multiple. They expect, if they are self-actualized, they expect, if they're good, that they're going to work in an environment where they can be good. Because away from your organization, they can. They can. They also generally are generous with the sharing of ideas. So the hierarchical model has tended to use information as a way of preserving itself. You go, well, I'll give this to you when I'm ready. Whereas these people grow up and they share stuff. They share stuff online. They share thinking. They share resources. You do stuff and you put it back out, and there's some kind of generous refeeding community. And they are very different beasts, and they behave very differently when they come into older organizations. And older organizations that are able to adapt to that flexibility, those people fly away in. But they also have a very high propensity to go and set up their own startup businesses, their own startup organizations. They're the kind of person, I just was having lunch with somebody who said, I don't know what my job is yet, but I'm going to do it. I'm just building up to what it's going to be. They understand that. That's fundamental. That's fundamental. They understand that you create your life. You don't inherit it or earn it from somebody who's already prescribed what it is. So these people grew up in a global economies, in a digitized world, where knowledge was plural, where innovation was seen as an ordinary living thing, where they understand that complexity operates. They're used to change, and they're used to collaboration, not its mythical deceit, which is collaboration means you all do the work and I and you will take the credit for it. So they're used to agency. So again, in the first session, somebody insightfully gave the indication of where they gave people an opportunity, and somebody said, yeah, I need to be more involved in this. That's a millennial talking to you. Those are the people who, if they're not staying in your organization, are going into somebody else's to give them that ability. And they're used to shared commitment and responsibility. Now, I know this is broad, but it's a way of understanding. When Erickson started doing this research, she was looking at things like software businesses that had leapt forward, or small NGOs that leapt forward and that were populated with very young people. And what happens is this, that as those people walk away from your organization, the organization becomes less effective. So when you get the people who should be the leader going, I have no room for leadership here, they will exit. They do it either physically or they do it psychologically, where they shut down. They stop contributing. They go, okay, so what do I need to do to survive in this? Okay, I'm going to do it. So they actually shut down the very talent that you're wanting. At the most toxic, it becomes cynicism. Cynicism is just the death of the spirit. It's a terrible thing to have. If you've got people who have become cynical, who are working around you, you've got to really, really look at what's going on in that environment. So, my sister used to, my twin sister, she, all those 3 kids sitting on the front of that car went on to do a lot of stuff internationally, even though they were scrubby Pukeatua farm kids. And she once described it this way. She said, oftentimes when she worked in Parliament a lot, and she said, oftentimes when I'm working with a community of people, she said, I look at it and you get some managers, some leaders who really are seeking donkeys by the neck. They want hard workers who'll do what they're told. But she said, oftentimes your really innovative coaching type leaders are going for the tigers by the tail. They're going for the more difficult thinker, but they're the more self-possessed, the more likely to turn around and actually call you to your face, but at the same time have a deep, abiding loyalty to the potential of what you're working for. And so if you get managers who go, I totally run a stable of donkeys, but they're very hardworking and lovely, that's fine, you'll have a stable of donkeys. I know this is a dumbed-down version of it. But where we do, if you are looking in your organization and you've got tigers working effectively, then you're probably doing something effective. But if they've all buggered off, again, you have to look at the dynamic that you're working in. Or if you are a tiger, you need to ask yourself, what are you doing to look after the other tigers around you? Now, and so how much time we got now? 5 minutes. Shit. Right. Okay. To give you an idea, a lot of this is based on a kind of orienting. We either orient this way, which is the self, the ego, the leader, or we have leaders who orient outwards to other people. And they are the ones who tend to influence. They tend to have abiding influence because those people become living and further functioning versions of that way of being in the world, that way of moving ideas forward. So if you have a look at things like positive deviance, this is the situation in the 1990s in Vietnam is the example that we often use. And this is an example of the second kind of non-heroic leader. What they did was they went in and they found that this was Save the Children. And this is Jeremy and Monique Sternin. And they went in and they found that in their pilot program, they found 64% of the population in this village was malnourished. That's a big number. But instead of wheeling in the heroic answer, going, okay, so what you need is this and this and this, no, a very different kind of leader. They stepped back and they said, maybe inside this population is the solution to this. Maybe in that backpack of knowledge that all these people have is the solution. Maybe we need to look and listen first. And they noticed a curious thing. They noticed that there were some of these positive deviants. These were not holding the top positions in the village, but there were a couple of families where the kids were not getting sick, and they were very healthy. They had the same resources, the same environment, it was the same picture, but there were these positive deviants who were doing better. And then they noticed some things. They were feeding their kids 4 times a day, and they were feeding their kids on potato, greens, and crabs, things that were not considered good for kids. And their kids were washing every day. And so what they did, they looked away from the heroic self into the situation, were prepared to look and identify, within 2 years, the malnutrition rate fell 85%. Okay, so I don't want to tell it as a euphoric story. It's just a different kind of orientation. It's the kind of person who goes into a situation and goes, perhaps with this group of people that are here, there will be a solution in there. It's my job to be able to find that and draw that out. Because you're going to have a higher buy-in when you're working with people who've already come up with solutions, even if they can't see it. So I'm going to skip now. So this idea of the post-heroic leader, the high influence kind of leader, they oftentimes are not at the top of the hierarchy. The qualification for a position is not ambition. It shouldn't. If you've got your organization, the qualification for leadership is ambition when it should be talent, you've got to relook. So your post-heroic leader, Joyner just talks that most people actually work from a heroic mindset. So most people work that way. Okay. But if we have a look at what do these people have in common, they tend to co-create with people, not consult. So they'll put a group of people around and they'll go, I'm asking your advice because collectively you know something that I don't know on my own. And we have to be able to put something together, and I don't know the answer to this. The second thing is that they challenge and protect. So on one level, they'll say to them, they were saying before, I've got your back. I've got your back. Okay, I know you guys are talented. I know that you can do something. I will try and make the environment round here so we can do it. But they also challenge the thinking. They question the ideas. And they attribute. In other words, they give acknowledgement to people who do stuff. They're very clear about it. They deflect acknowledgement away from themselves and back out into the group. So it's questioning based. So they'll be asking questions like this. What do you see as the main issue? What do you see the options for dealing with the problem? What's your preferred option and why? What are the benefits, the costs, the risks? See, it's all question-based. It's not about an individual. It's about the idea that's come up from the table. Who else needs to be involved? What will it take to execute your plan? What support do you need? It's all oriented on the questioning. It's all oriented through questioning onto the issue at the table, not to the individual. So I'm going to close now. So this is, I know this is a hackneyed phrase, but I actually always think it's a very powerful one. And it occurs in the essence of teaching too. A great teacher is not a bloated ego that demands to be fed and adored so that they can grow their own self. What they do is they subtly are growing the talents of other people. It's not a new idea. It's not a new idea. But Oscar Wilde said this, and this is, if you feel a bit alone with this, you absolutely count. He said, a dreamer is someone who can only find their way by moonlight, and their punishment is that they see the dawn before the rest of the world. It takes strength, but you're hugely valuable if you have it. Thank you.